So this is what I show the TAs to be right now. Is this group, and these two, and I believe we're really close on 3 and 11. So I just kind of put them in a different category. The articles I show on the all side of the table: amendment rights, ABL, motions, hiring and cadet standards, cadets, entire agreement. And that was one I think we had some questions on. We might be able to go over maintenance of standards and merger with EMS. And again, I know there's some questions on that one. In fact, I've talked to Selena since, and I think you might have talked to her also, Devin. I asked her to watch today so she can come see some of those things. So Selena, if you're watching, hello. We'll be responding to civil service. I think we're getting really close on this one. Savings clause, I think it's mostly grammar and then termination agreement. What we'd like to propose today is a conceptual wage proposal. Leave hours and work overtime, we probably will present later in the afternoon, but we do have a conceptual proposal for a reduced work week. I'd like to do this morning also. And we're still working on a wellness article, which we want to propose. Now, let me ask you this, Devin. So we haven't proposed an article, we proposed a concept. Does that meet the threshold of bringing up a new issue before the deadline?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. And then after this, what we have, unless you guys propose some of these today, I'm proposed would be discipline, use civilian, proper drug use, or whatever you want to call it. And I think I got the latest TA on that from Selena yesterday, the day before. So I think we can integrate that. And I mean, is that, the one she sent me was from May, is that what we consider the latest TA at this point? Latest agreed TA, or?
I don't know. I mean, I think we haven't met for a while, since sometime in May. Sometime in May is when we met, but I think it was also May that you brought up certain issues. We went back, looked at it, recognized how you were reading it that way, so called Selena and gave her, we verbalized a change. She was, I don't want to say which, no, I'll keep our conversations confidential, but if we're to meet again, because we're pretty far apart on money, but if we were to meet again, I think we would have corrections to our drug testing article, which I think the union will be amenable to.
And it looks like to me the latest one that she sent me reflects some of the things that you were discussing. You might need to, or pull back and make some changes.
Yeah, so I wouldn't, on your end, I wouldn't call it a TA because we haven't met since I sent her what we would propose if we did meet again.
Okay.
Yeah, it has not been proposed to the table, much less TA.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to make sure. Definitions, disciplinary, civilian use, employees, drug. And those are all, the reason we're holding off on not to think they're going to be contentious, a lot of changes. We're just trying to get some of the more substantive articles on the table. Just all that. And then articles we're calling like a conflict, or we think there's some big differences on right now that are going to be a challenge to work through, I guess. And I realize some of these you've already said you're looking at it and researching, and I understand all that for these four. And that's kind of it for that. Would you like to pick yours up now? Did you find any differences from what you
just a little bit, but we can go through it and
okay.
And I think though, I mean, just based on what we just saw, we're essentially on the same page. So, not sure why that's showing up. Okay, here we go. So, status update 6.3. So yeah, we're on session 5. I've included some future dates here, so we know we're meeting on Monday the 6th, and then the 10th, and it looks like we got some. It should be the June 13th, June 16th, June 23, June 24, June 28th, July 6th, July 8th, July 11th, and 12th. And then I think when we get a little closer to 11th and 12th, we'll see where we're at. We we did look and see how many times y'all had met. I know I wasn't here personally, but how many times we as the city met last go around, and I believe it was about 12. And of course y'all were able to get a deal. So we've got at least 16 on the books, and we're very hopeful that we can also get a deal. And I think that if we are close, we would definitely be interested in an extension of the 60 days. If we are close, so.
Yeah, we feel the same way. If we're close, and most likely sign an extension, we just think we get most of it done in 60 days. We'll see what we end up.
Okay. So far, this is what I have, that we have TA'd to date: 5, 6, 20, 21, 25, 29, and 32. Does that line up with what you have?
25, 29, and 32, yep.
And these are proposals that we have received from y'all's side, and granted, this includes, doesn't determine which side of the table it's on, and it does include articles that have been TA'd. It's just what has been presented so far from y'all's side.
Makes sense.
And from the city side, the city has responded to the following articles, and again, this includes some TAs and some stuff maybe on y'all's side of the table, some stuff maybe on our side of the table. So we have reviewed language and we're ready to take Article 3, and this would be option 2 of the one that y'all had proposed to us via email a few weeks ago or a few sessions ago. Okay. So we'll present that for you today, and I believe this was very similar to one of your slides where we were close to a TA. We consider these to be on your side of the table, and some of this may have been in the category of what you included on our side of the table. Article 26, I think you had indicated was on our side of the table as one of them, on the top of my head, but I also saw that you're about to counter with 8 at the very least and 30. So, and I think that part of the reason, Matt, you are here today is to have some of these additional discussions with some of these articles.
Yeah, and I made notes of this on your side of the table, but I think it's in discussion.
Right. Yeah. What we will be proposing today is Article 4, Article 7, Article 23, and Article 27. So I do think that lines up with a few of the articles that you had on our side of the table.
So we get those 4, 7, 23, 27. Can you go back one more slide? I wanted to. So these are on our side of the table. Let's check this real quick. Let's see what's going on. Termination, and merger. Yeah, that's really close. Okay.
And really, the reason we put that list there, or these articles specifically, we proposed these last time around, and I know that they're still up for discussion, but we would expect probably at least some counter-proposal language change or something like that as well.
Okay.
So we just went over pending articles with no proposals from either side, but I do see in your PowerPoint that y'all will be presenting some of these in this column, so this will eventually change. Articles actively being discussed. I actually didn't add to I didn't add to this slide from the last time we had seen this. I think we're all on the same page as what we're still talking about, and I expect some to be eliminated from this slide and then some to be added. So, but we consider all articles actively being discussed at the moment, and of course, no change from last time. We remain committed to working toward agreement with y'all. So, do you have any questions?
No? Okay. I think it's pretty close.
Do you want to propose your articles?
Well, before we do that, I do have law watching as well, and I know I committed to you last time, Bob, and I'll just be honest, I forgot to follow through with it. So law's watching, if you can kind of explain, we talked about it wasn't your intention to go around the resolution and by including all of the charter language stuff into various parts of the contract, and I think you said if the city can commit to something, something, and something, then and I said, okay, well, let me
just give me. I'll fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I'm sure you got a list of things. And I said, okay, well, I'll go back and verify because I didn't want to speak off the cuff, and now I forgot what the something, something, and something were. But I think it had to do with the city committing to following through with the resolution or something like that. I can't remember, but I'm not trying to put you
I
on the
remember
spot.
one of the three somethings,
Yeah.
so I might have to go back and look at what they were too,
Okay.
but, if you don't recall, but, I know one of the somethings was, I think, on entire agreement, there's some language we struck, because we thought it might impede, the clear language of management rights and names of standards. You know, we said we do think that in collective bargaining, there's a continual duty to bargain. We wanted to make sure that was maintained. So part of that was, I think I think what I signaled is some of that language should probably stay if we had, you know, if you were to clear up at the table what it meant, and that it wouldn't in any way harm the clear language, weakness of the clear language of management rights or names of standards. I know that was one of the items.
Okay.
And we're talking about that on your side of the table, management rights and names of standards. Might be a good time to do that.
So you're saying you want verification that if we were to take out your additional charter, the additions you made by including the charter amendment language, if we were to take that out, that doesn't take away from either of the management rights articles or the maintenance of standards.
Yeah, I don't think there's any, I might be wrong. I think on that article, I don't think there was any charter language inserted.
Right.
Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I don't think there was.
I don't think there is a.
Yeah, we just wanted, on that particular one, that's one of the ones I remember so well, so I'm bringing it up, so.
Okay. Oh, I got you.
And we'll review stuff today, and I'm sure you will too, and we'll get the other ones, but, and Matt may remember some as well. He's looked at the tapes too.
Okay.
He was kind of queuing in on the questions you may have.
Yeah.
But with that one, we really, you know, it kind of contemplates that we've all looked at everything, we met at arm's length. We, you know, and then it goes a little further in my mind. Then it says something like, even things you didn't know about are part of this agreement. And to me, that's not what we'd like to see. I mean, we think that any changes of benefits, wages or working conditions during the term of the agreement are negotiable, and they should, and it falls under what I would call a continual duty to bargain.
Do you want me to put that up right now?
If you'd like to,
I
that's
mean,
fine.
since we're talking about it and and we have some, I would say that, I don't know why this, I have it up on my screen, but it is not coming up on this. I don't know what's going on here.
Seems like a high risk maneuver there.
It's like it's seeing this as a here we go, as a doubles, as if I had a second monitor. Yes, and I this is one of the ones that I do recall that, you know, Matt being here. And so the way we've looked at this, right? And I think the last time we had some discussion over this, I had mentioned that this language and this contract, I've seen it in many other contracts, and Matt Brownsville is one of them that actually has that, right? So the first sentence, you know, the parties acknowledge that during negotiations, we've negotiated over the mandatory subjects of bargaining. And then the second sentence, therefore, the city and the association agree for the duration of the agreement that they waive the right there's a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, right? So I understand, and we understand what you're saying in that, like, if something comes up and there's a benefit that we need to bargain over, whether it's benefit or something that we need to bargain over, we need to come to the table and bargain over that. But what we think that this sentence is saying, and Matt, you can chime in if I'm saying something incorrect, but what we think this sentence is saying is that, let's say we've negotiated over an article, and I don't know, let's just say something vacation, I don't know, whatever. And at the time, y'all didn't realize that it would have an impact on this, even though, I'm not saying that doesn't mean that you didn't do your homework or whatever, but or you should have done your homework. And at the time, you didn't realize that it would have an impact on that. And then, a contract agreement ensues, and then we're in arbitration. And then it goes back to that principle of what we were talking about last time, is that you can't get in arbitration what you fail to get in negotiation, whether you realized it or not. So I think I understand what you're saying, and that's not the intent, is to kind of have an end around and, do something sneaky. It's just that if we had bargained over something and it had some detrimental impact that y'all didn't realize, well, that would be more on y'all, and you can't go and fix it in arbitration for what was failed to obtain in negotiations. Does that make
I
sense?
understand what you're saying, and that makes sense. So let me put it more simple and see if you can agree with this. Are you saying that the only thing this applies to are things within the four corners of the agreement, and not new things that could happen to wages, benefits, and working conditions?
Well, so I guess the principle, I don't disagree, but I you know, if for instance, so let's say that the language is very specific, right? So something is at the discretion of the chief. And I'm gonna use, I guess, COVID as an example, right? So, you know, hazard pay is at the discretion of the chief, and I'm just sort of making things up at the moment, so bear with me. So COVID is something that is unforeseen that we would not have anticipated. And the mayor and the governor and the president of the United States are actually declaring emergencies, but the fire chief is the one that has the discretion. And so the fire chief is not giving hazard pay, or is only giving hazard pay for a certain period of time. The language specifically says the fire chief. And for example, last negotiation session, we actually changed it from mayor to fire chief, right? And then a contract grievance ensues that the fire chief isn't providing hazard pay. Well, then we're saying we specifically changed it from the mayor last time to the discretion of the fire chief. Yes, COVID was an unanticipated, unforeseen, something we didn't we couldn't anticipate at the time. But the language is pretty clear that it's the discretion of the fire chief. So
Language clear what?
that it's at the discretion of the fire chief in my hypothetical example. So that I think this language covers some of those unanticipated things, but at the same time, it's certainly, like I said, it's not our intent, or it's not the city's intent to have some end around and do something sneaky in terms of changing pay or things like that without, coming to the table beforehand. So,
Matt, do you have anything to offer on that?
Well, so I agree with what you're saying about the struck language, and I think that's consistent with how the NLRB has interpreted similar language. I think Bob explained that the striking of that in the proposal was to set up this conversation about the continual duty to bargain. I think that what we're concerned about is mandatory subjects of bargaining that are not addressed at all in the contract. And our position would be, under the current language, there's still a duty to bargain over those, but that hasn't necessarily been a practice of the parties. And so I think that's the reason for wanting to have the conversation, that we think the current language supports this continual duty to bargain, but the striking of the language was to have the conversation. So I guess, for an example, the fire chief wants to put surveillance cameras in all the fire stations. I think that's something that's not addressed at all in the CPA. And so our position is that's something that would have to be negotiated at the table as a mandatory subject of bargaining.
and I will tell you that I don't think we disagree. We had internal conversations about putting firefighters on buses. That would be something that we would need to come to the table and negotiate with you. I think we're on the same page, and I don't disagree that this is 30-year-old language that could be tweaked. So if you have some tweaks, I think that we would certainly entertain it. But I certainly don't think we're trying to get to what you're afraid of, if that makes sense.
And that's all I really need to hear. I mean, I think we can maybe tweak the language a little bit to make it more clear, so after we're all gone, whoever reads it, it makes better sense to them, clear language. But I just want to make sure it's not harming our right to continually bargain on changes of the working condition, wages, or benefits.
But Matt, I'll bring this up since you're here, since, I did bring it up with Bob. This is a two-way street. I would say you're right, this hasn't been always adhered to, but it's, for most of the time, it's been to the benefit of your membership. We just got parental leave, we didn't sit down and negotiate over that. This would have to be things that, even if it's a benefit to your membership, we would sit down and negotiate it, just like we would if it's a benefit to the chief. I think that at some point, we both have to agree, when we signed this deal, we knew what we signed. Let's not do end arounds, and let's, it's not to say we won't agree at the table. It's just we have a process by which we amend things and move forward. Because if that duty to bargain is going to exist, it has to exist on both sides. You know, that's about as blunt as I can put it. You know, I just think that that's probably the best way for us to move forward and to have this open and honest relationship is we both acknowledge, you know what, there's a duty to talk to the other side of the table before we go through with this. So, okay. I think we understand what you're saying, and I think we all understand where we're coming from.
And you know, you used that example before, and I'm going to respond the same way. You know, with the parental leave, it was, we were trying to get something different. Actually, we were trying to get maternity leave, which we're going to be talking about at the table. And the policymakers wanted it to be parental leave, and they said it was an equity issue, and they kind of took control of it. And then it was negotiated with Joya, you could say, because we had extensive conversations about it. And she had the absolute authority, so the city manager whether to do it or not. You know, the way the charter works is that Joya, as the director of HR, would make a recommendation on policy changes, and then Spencer would have to approve it. So I don't think it's an end run. You know, I mean, you're using an example, I can see why you'd use that example, but I never looked at it as an end run. That's exactly how it evolved.
Well, I know you didn't, Bob. I'm just saying that I think based on, I don't think there's any doubt it's a fiscal benefit. It's definitely a mandatory subject of bargaining. If it existed and we decided to take it away because Joya, as the HR director, felt this wasn't, you know, the practice anymore, I'm sure you would, you know, be at the table saying, hey, you can't just take this away because management all of a sudden feels that it's not necessary anymore. So I'm just saying it's got to cut both ways. So,
and you know, maybe it is about a lot about relationships, right? Because we had asked for parental leave several times, and we were shut down without any discussion at all, without any exploring of our interest in past bargaining sessions. And so that might have been part of the motivation. Policymakers said, hey, you need to go further, that we were ready to accept that. You know, so maybe in this new era of better relationships, you know, we can talk about all the issues and we can explore all of our interests.
yeah.
And maybe come up with a way to do it at the table.
But I don't want to get into a he said, she said. I would say that I disagree with your assessment that it was a shutdown without any discussions. I wasn't here in 17. Based on what I remember, I didn't even see, because I had to do all this research when the parental leave was going on the council, I didn't see a proposal from the association on parental leave. Now, I don't know if discussions happened in the hallway or whatnot, you know, but but I know that wasn't the case in 15. We did have discussions, and it wasn't just automatically shut down. It may not have been to your satisfaction. I understand your frustration, but you know, but either way, let's move past that issue.
Yeah, and you know, I think another example that I haven't really talked about before, but it's very current, is the Wildfire Battalion. So the Wildfire Battalion was set up between contracts. It changes the working condition of the entire battalion of people. It puts 2-year requirements on them if they don't get out of the battalion by a certain amount of time. And no certification pay was awarded, even though there was an increase in workload. And so that is, I think, a really good current example. In fact, that we have agreements on that. We hope to settle that here. But it appeared management wasn't open to a continual duty bargain over was, I think most people would consider a significant change in working conditions and benefits, if you talk about that. So, you know, we want to make sure everybody's on the same page when we leave the table and what the environment is after we sign the contract too. Because I don't know that it's, and you know, and that goes 2 ways, like you said, you know, it goes 2 ways. And so if we're going to have this different way of doing business, then we need to define that on both sides of the table.
Okay, before we go to the, you know, I understand your discussions on entire agreement, and like I said, if you can just, I don't need it right now, but if you can give some thought as to what other things you needed from the city as far as assurances to take out those references to the charter amendment, because like we explained, Matt, our position is, you know, the union and our council, he had, you know, Bob and maybe other folks, you know, on your team had meetings with council offices. They came up with a resolution which has a couple of outs depending on what happens in the Supreme Court, but to include the language here in the contract without referencing all those outs, obviously it makes it a legal obligation no matter what happens in the Supreme Court. That's not something we're comfortable doing. Bob explained that's not his intention. So I kind of wanted to say, okay, well, let's take this out. Tell me what assurances you need from the city. And that's the part I can't remember. So I know one of them, one of them was that article maybe, but if you can think about that, then I can just.
And I think when Matt starts responding to some of the things from EMS and some of the other things that there will be inserted language about line arbitration, that might be helpful.
Okay.
So, let's put those things up. So here's our response to, Matt, quickly tell me if this is correct, because I had a little trouble with my OneDrive this morning, so this should come up here in a second.
Yes, that looks right. Okay, and so I think y'all understand the intent on this article. We're trying to take steps toward the commission being a more viable forum to resolve disputes. Just as I don't think y'all would want to resolve disputes in front of a committee that we appointed all the members of, and that one of my law partners advises. We have concerns about operating the opposite way, which is the current setup. I know there were concerns expressed about the prior proposal that it might have prohibited the city attorney advising the commission from ever agreeing with the city or from talking with that person's supervisor. So I think this proposal addresses those concerns. The city attorney has just got to be guided by professional judgment and not by any duty of loyalty to the city as employer during the time they're advising the commission. And then instead of not sharing the confidential information, I know there was concern about talking with the supervisor. That's backed off to just not coordinating with other city employees to push the city agenda in front of the commission. You're just trying to take baby steps toward kind of independence of the commission.
So we'll send this question's great. If not, we'll send this over to you all by email. The savings clause, I think we just made some grammatical changes, Matt. I know you made these changes. You want to speak to these, please?
Yeah, this is just pedantic grammar stuff. This is nothing substantive. I just think it's a little bit clearer this way, but there's no intent to change any of the meaning of the savings clause.
Hey, I'm sorry, could you put that one back?
Yeah.
Did you want to put that up?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
My question is just, this is red line from the current contract language, not from our proposal?
No, this is red line from your proposal.
Okay, so we'll have to figure that out, that's okay.
Okay. We'll send that one over too. So I'm going to bring it down to section 2, and Matt, if you could let us know, please.
Sure. So section 2, we've proposed again to have an evergreen during the period that we're negotiating and during the period that we're going through interest arbitration. I know there was an objection to having the words interest arbitration in there, so now it just refers generically to any impasse resolution mechanism. Obviously, there are others under Chapter 174, and we think this just restates the background law. It's our position that it would violate the city's duty to bargain in good faith to make any unilateral changes while we're still bargaining or while we're in an impasse resolution procedure. I think that's been the law under the NLRA for decades. State courts have said that's all ported over under chapter 174. And so we think, since that's the background law, it just protects everybody to make it explicit in the contract. And the main situations that jumped out at me that protection would be helpful for is situations where the city's doing something that complies with the contract, but that's not allowed under civil service after the express termination date. So like using the hiring process or using the promotion process or making an appointment that's allowed under the contract, but that's not allowed under the statute, that this would make it clear that there's authority to do that under the contract. So that's the intent of that section.
Is there any question on that section?
Not right now. We'll have to look at what our proposal was and then yours. So
Okay.
take a look at it.
I mean, it's not really a math question, but I still don't understand why, based on the timing, why we can't just say, you know, there's a 6-month evergreen to the entire contract, because whatever, if we're ending up at, you know, binding arbitration, because that's the process, you know, we should get that done well before March of any year. And if we're ending up in some other process, I mean, I guess I'm just kind of, because I offered that last time, is saying, hey, instead of 1 month extension 6 times where we need both parties to say yes, why don't you guys just offer a mandatory 6-month evergreen, and that'll kind of resolve it. But I mean, I get it. I don't know if this is our preferred method, but Matt, I do understand if we were to take the route that has never happened before, here at least, which is to go to a court, it may take longer than 6 months. So I think I can understand that as well. Okay.
That goes on to the next page. So section 3, I think Bob talked about this at the table last time, that our preference is we understand the need for flexibility if there's a tax issue, but you know, consistent with what we talked about before and the emphasis on the continual duty to bargain, we'd rather see a reopener so that we can come to the table and reach agreement rather than, you know, automatic wage reduction.
Is there any question on this section? For now?
For now.
Let's run back to this day. I'll put the MS. Before that. Okay, and so, you know, one thing where we started, is I'm just committing again, we're not trying to write binding arbitration into contract in a way that would make it where it's impeachable in a sense. You know, you couldn't challenge it later in court. We made a promise we wouldn't do that. We're not trying to do that. But we're in a binding arbitration environment, so certain things have to be put in there in order to acknowledge that, in order to implement it in a way that needs to be implemented. And that's all we're trying to do. And I've stated that several times, and whether you believe me or not, I think it's on the record in the history of bargaining, it should mean something. But Matt, if you don't mind explaining, this was one of the questions we had last time, I think you all did, on how this would work and how this may not, how it might impede the rights of EMS or whatever. So I brought Matt in to kind of explain his thoughts on that.
Right, and so from our perspective, this last proposal is just the current contract language updated to reflect the new legal framework that we're under. You know, the current language is we bargain and then we use the available dispute resolution mechanisms. You know, mediation, or we can volunteer to go to interest arbitration. That was the law at the time. And now the law is, you know, we've got mandatory interest arbitration. And I guess there's something I was hoping to understand a little better from y'all's side, the kind of idea that the EMS association would be involved in interest arbitration, or that their contract would be impacted. I always understood the current contracts and these proposals as kind of parallel processes. There was a duty to sit down with the EMS association, which has one dispute resolution mechanism at the end of it. I think in the current contract, it's just mediation, and then y'all can unilaterally implement it. And then there was a parallel process with us that you've got to sit down with us. And then there's, you know, either voluntary mediation or voluntary interest arbitration in the current language. But it sounded like maybe y'all thought there was supposed to be a process where all three of us are at the table, the city and the both unions.
Yeah, I think if we did merger with EMS, and we couldn't get an agreement with EMS or with y'all, our idea of mediation would include all three parties. I mean, I don't know which other way to say this, other than we're not interested in having a binding arbitration where the firefighters get to decide what happens with the EMS employees. I mean, it's not just their rights, there are employees, and, you know, we just feel like, I think Bob said something, and I don't want to hold you to it, Bob, but he said something like, well, they would go up and testify. Well, giving their testimony isn't, you know, consent on their behalf, and I would, we're not interested in merging one. I mean, under this scenario, you could say, you know, hey, the AFA wants, you know, the finance department to be part of AFA, and if we can't agree, then we'll take it to binding arbitration. I mean, you know, just, we think the mandatory subjects of bargaining, you know, if that's the route that it goes with binding arbitration, then great, you know, but that's mandatory subjects as it relates to the firefighters, you know, but as it relates to other entities, we just don't think that the charter amendment allows you to, you know, just absorb whichever department, division of the city, you know, that you feel without getting, I mean, there's just a multitude of issues, and I just don't think, our concern is, under the previous language, when we would have done mediation, it would have been all three parties. You know, just like y'all wouldn't want to be merged into a different, you know, a public safety department, let's just say, without your approval, not just your testimony at arbitration. We're not trying to do the same thing with the EMS employees. So we want three people to shake hands if the merger would ever happen. You know, the city and each of the unions. So.
And you know, you don't have to not hold me to what I said. It was recorded, but there was a lot more that was said than just they could testify. What was said, besides that, was the more important context, was that they're under meet and confer, and they can try to negotiate as best they can with the tools they have for the wages, benefits, working conditions. We're under this other sort of dispute resolution. We would do the same thing. It doesn't mean they're in conflict with their working conditions and our working conditions. But we would certainly want to be able to use all the tools we have to benefit for our wages, benefits, and working conditions. When I said they could testify, they could provide context to the arbitrator. It doesn't mean that they're in a bargaining unit, bargaining for them, while we're taking away their rights. I think that's a very important distinction to make. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's helpful for us to understand how y'all see this, that it's kind of 120 days to bargain and then an agreement between all three parties, or the city gets to unilaterally implement. I mean, that's what we're saying, right?
No.
Yeah, I think there's two issues really, and one of them is that I don't think the charter includes EMS, it's just fire. So this exceeds the scope of what's in the charter as one issue, and then the second being it's violating the EMS contract entirely. So
yeah, that's the part I didn't understand, because the charter talks about negotiations between the city and the AFA, and And so that's what this article's talking about too. You know, if we're gonna merge the city and the AFA, sit down, and I don't know how that has anything to do with the EMS contract or the EMS association. That's what I was getting at.
Well, right now they have their own contract that that we're currently bargaining over, at the moment. I guess it's your opinion that the charter, that the scope of the charter includes EMS.
No, the charter just includes negotiations between the city and AFA.
Right.
Right.
I mean, we may be, I don't know, we may just be speaking on different planes here, because you said something that just kind of raised my eyebrows. You're like, I don't understand how this would include EMS, and I'm looking at it the opposite way. I don't understand how it doesn't include EMS. If EMS only wants to merge in to fire under condition A, and condition A is not acceptable to the AFA, is it your contention you can take this to binding arbitration and have the arbitrators impose condition B, and now EMS is obligated to merge in under condition B? Because that is something we are vehemently against. We want all three parties to shake hands on any, and we don't think a panel of arbitrators can or should merge in a different entity into AFA, even though AFA, yes, merger with EMS. From the AFA standpoint, we understand why we want to sit down and negotiate those things, and we're not opposed to that. What I'm saying is, you can't just say, well, we heard you, we understand you want it this way, but we don't think that's the right way, we're gonna take it to our binding arbitration. We're gonna merge you in a different way, even if you vehemently object to that way. Sorry, tomorrow you're wearing AFA t-shirts now. I just don't think that's the route that we're looking to do to any of our employees. So I think that's, like I said, Matt, we maybe this requires more of just a hallway conversation, because both of us have been doing this a long time, and for me to say I don't understand how this doesn't impact EMS, and for you to say I don't understand how you guys think it does, I think we're probably just talking about two different issues here. So let's have a further discussion maybe.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Some of this I'm hearing and understanding for the first time.
Gotcha. Okay.
But we're not trying to change EMS's working condition, wages, or benefits by adding this in, just so you know. If it has an implication, then we'll see if we can do the work on that. That's never what we intend. We just want to make sure our benefits, working conditions, and wages are handled correctly to be able to dispute. We're not looking at impeding them in any way, or harming them in any way. That never was the intent. Well, sometimes good intentions don't work out, so
Wouldn't that be covered in the resolution that's already been signed?
I'm sorry.
Wouldn't, like, if you're saying that your intent is to make sure that your benefits and working conditions and everything like that are resolved appropriately, and wouldn't that be covered in the signed agreement between the city and the AFA in terms of the binding arbitration?
Well, we're talking about the context of a merger here, right?
Right,
So,
right.
And I think there's some, contemplation for the city that they could do this on their own without negotiating. Well, I mean, they could negotiate, but then they can do what they can impose what they want to. And we think we're in a slightly different, a different dispute resolution procedure where, we should be able to take that and arbitrate with disagreement. So if they wanted to lower our wages to do it, let's say, we think we should be able to go to an arbitrator. They want to change our working condition. Like, let's say they said, well, every firefighter is now going to work on an ambulance for the first 2 years. That might be a good idea. It might be a terrible idea, but we think we should be able to take that to an arbitrator, and both sides can present evidence and make a determination on, a ruling if we can't come to an agreement at the table. I think the beauty of the binding arbitration will probably come to a deal at the table because when you go to the arbitrator, then there's a risk to that, right?
So I get that part of it, right? I get that part of it. The EMS is gonna come in, they're gonna say, hey, everybody should ride the ambulance for some time. You're like, hey, you can't just do that because you agreed to that with EMS, you need I fully understand that part of it. What if when EMS says we need to come in with rank, and you say no, and they're like adamant, we're not gonna merge unless we come in with rank. You take it to the arbitrator says you can't come in with rank. We just force them in, with no rank. I think that it's hard to separate, when you put the language in, I understand now what you're saying, when you put the language in though, that says this, it encompasses a lot more than what you're probably intending to encompass.
We'll go through it and make sure intents will be intent. But my understanding, Matt, if you could talk about this, the arbitrator is in the authority to rule on what EMS will do in terms of rank. His authority would only be to rule on what we could do. And I realize that could change they do in some minor ways, probably, maybe some bigger ways I'm not contemplating, but the arbitrator wouldn't say EMS is gonna come in with rank or not with rank, they're gonna come with these ranks. My understanding is that's beyond the arbitrator's authority. Is that?
I'm on the same page with you.
Okay. All right. I mean, this doesn't change our general objection to putting in the charter language into the contract, because even if it's not intended, we see it as a legal workaround to the resolution that was passed, because it doesn't have any of the exceptions that was put in the resolution. And, you're gonna be able to argue, well, Supreme Court ruled against, the firefighters in Houston. Oh, well, too bad, because we got this language in the contract. So regardless of what the Supreme Court has said, you'll have to abide by this, because now it's a legal binding document. So we just feel like the two have to be. And there's, like I said, I want to give you guys a chance to talk about what it's going to take as far as a commitment from the city to take these references to the city charter out, because we do have every intention of abiding by the resolution that was passed by council. And if you need other assurances, we can go through that. But I am glad we talked about this a little bit, because I think that this was, concerning to say the least. Not just with EMS, but what else does it entail if the AFA feels that we can bring in other subjects and just lump it into our negotiations, and all of a sudden have the city be obligated to do it because we have binding arbitration? That was kind of a cascading issue that we had. But I understand what you're trying. I just think that the language here encroaches a lot more than what you're probably intending to encroach.
Well, I should probably talk to my attorney first. No, I'm just kidding. But, I mean, the savings clause the whole purpose of savings clause is supposed to be able to fix things that happen in the legal world that might conflict with what's in the contract. So maybe a solution would be to make some further changes to the savings clause to make sure that's explicit when it comes to references to binding arbitration. But I don't quite, and I'm trying to understand the city's position, but my struggle with it is it seems like the savings clause already does that. And how does it not? So let's say there was a ruling that binding arbitration is unconstitutional. Doesn't the savings clause wipe out every section of binding arbitration then? Depending on how strong the ruling is, of course. Wouldn't it take care of it? And if it does, why are we worried about it? And if it doesn't, it's entirely, maybe we can enhance the savings clause in some way that gives the city side some comfort.
Well, I think the savings clause talks about things that might be struck as like illegal. It's not illegal to agree to binding arbitration in the contract, so that's kind of where we're coming from.
And that's why maybe we could enhance the savings clause to make sure the promises we feel like we're making are actual promises within the contract if the legal environment changes. Maybe that's the answer. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe something that mirrors the agreement with the city manager and the savings clause. And, Devin, I don't think the slope that you're talking about is that slippery. This article only gets triggered if the city wants to merge the department. So it's not like the AFA can go and say, we want to merge with X, Y, or Z city department and then kind of force arbitration over it.
All right.
Discussion? We could do our conceptual proposals, or we could.
Yeah, might as well, go ahead.
Want to do that? Okay.
Can we do this? Those four?
So we decided to hold off on an actual proposal until we get the PMF report that might inform us of some different choices or put us on other paths of looking at it. So this is kind of a conceptual proposal. And we want to start off by the justifications. We think there's clearly a new normal in Austin now in terms of its environment. You know, we've had CPI rises that haven't been seen in 40 years. The fastest growing city in the nation with populations over 400,000. Austin's become one of the least affordable cities in the nation. Fastest growing cost of housing. Best job market in the nation, which puts a lot of pressures on people not becoming a firefighter or actually leaving the fire service. For the first time in my career, we're seeing people leave to go to other departments or leave to go to private industry. That's just unheard of 10 years ago, and it's happening more. I'm not saying it's a gigantic trend, but it's obviously a trend, you know, that we're seeing. And we just dropped out of the highest top 10 place to live, and the reason cited is affordability. So these are all economic pressures that we haven't even felt 2 years ago to a large extent, that we're feeling now. And the firefighters, I just want to say this, because I've done this 7 times now, this is my 7th bargaining cycle. We have questions we ask every time on our surveys about, you know, what do you want in a contract? Everybody always wants more money, right? But you're right, you made the statement last session, Devin, that we usually come to the table for operational issues, not so much economic. This time pay raise is priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I mean, I'm hearing things in my memory I've never heard before. They are definitely feeling the pinch, they definitely feel the burden of a really harsh, or you know, for a fixed wage employee, harsh economic environment, and it's real, and it can be quantified in many, many different ways. This is a Nest report. It's kind of an insider thing for real estate, and you can see the date is a recent date. It's March, I think, 22nd, 23rd. In Austin, Round Rock is the fastest growing area in the nation. We've had a population growth in this area of 28.8%. Austin's had about a 23% growth in that time, Austin proper. Change in housing index is about 130%. Some houses are selling at hundreds of thousands of dollars above the asking price, and prices overall have increased 40% since April 2020. This is a source from Texas A&M, Texas Real Estate Research Center. It's kind of it's the largest public real estate research center in the nation. So a lot of people up Nest probably use a lot of their information actually. Austin remains a top half. Austin remains at the top half, homes selling at almost 500,000. Dallas is a distant second. And this graph here, the blue line is not as important as sales. You can see when sales are kind of flat in Austin, the average price of the house is going over 600,000. And really these last couple of years, driving rapidly, that has tremendous financial pressures on the entire environment. This New York Times article, I think it was from November of last year, how Austin became the least affordable city in America, one of them. And yeah, it was November 2021. Home price in Austin skyrocketed, a record of median of $536,000 up in October. And you're going to see other sources that show even since November, that's gone up tremendously since then. Rentals have surged too. The average cost of an 800 square foot apartment now at $1,600. That has also increased since then. So when we talk about that, we're not just talking about current firefighters. I think we have a shared interest to make sure we build an environment where people can come in as firefighters. I'm talking to recruits now that are choosing not to come to Austin because of the economics. They can't afford it. And then we have firefighters that are trending to leave now to private industry and other fire departments. Wall Street Journal. This was April of this year. The best job markets aren't in the biggest cities. This is a hard graph to see, but what it's doing is charting different cities from 2019 to 2022. Austin has one of the hottest job markets in the nation. Again, it creates a lot of upward pressure, a lot of financial pressure on people to move to private sector jobs. And also, it sets a very hot economy with a the cost of living in Austin is much higher than other cities in the nation, particularly in Texas. We aren't in the top 10 anymore for best place to live. That was May of this year. The reason? Affordability. Is the cost of housing. This is Federal Reserve Bank, a branch out of Dallas. We've had a 13.8% increase in financial activity over the last year. You can see in this graph where we had a kind of a COVID bump, but then you continue this line forward, it actually accelerates. The economy in Austin is hot. And that hot economy is driving up housing prices, renting prices, and cost of all goods. Here's the unemployment rate in Texas versus U.S. versus Austin. Austin's the lowest unemployment rate. Again, fueling this pressure to not take jobs as a firefighter and to actually leave the job as a firefighter. In March, the median home was near the highest level in all streets of high all-time in Texas. The median price home sold at over $500,000, 12% rise over 1 year. And this graph doesn't show the housing costs, it shows permits, okay? It shows the Texas average in Austin area. Again, it's a very, very hot environment like we've never seen in the last, maybe in the history of Austin, but I've been here since '81. I've never seen anything like what's going on right now. Private sector earnings, why are we talking about that? We have people leaving our job, our firefighting job, for the private sector. And again, significantly higher than Texas and somewhat higher than US averages. So some of the conclusions of this is that given higher rents, high cost of living, higher wage earning potential in Austin, higher home pricing, and relatively low starting firefighter wages, it's making it much more difficult for highly qualified candidates to consider working for AFT. And this isn't that different than what Paul's used saw from EMS, right? It's the same sort of premises, maybe different sources. And higher Austin wages and loss of Austin firefighter purchasing power are tempting experienced firefighters to resign, move to other fire departments, and do other careers. I just talked to another one yesterday. He was asking me, should he stay vested? Shouldn't he? He's leaving. And the reason he's leaving is better opportunities for him. Austin Fire Department and EMS are probably the same. We've really had the fortune of recruiting and retaining very highly qualified, intelligent, conscientious people. And guess what people are looking at in the job market right now? That type of person. So it's creating these sort of pressures on our department, on our industry. And at the same time this happened, and I think in EMS you made this, in the first session you made this quote, Deb, and I will hold you to it. You said that our last contract in 17, the firefighters had the most fiscally conservative contract of any contract ever negotiated, which was true. Unfortunately, we also had the biggest CPI changes. We are down about 13% in our purchasing power. Now that includes year 6, which would be awarded this year if we get a contract, right? But it's a significant, so the line on the above here, this kind of reddish line, is the CPI over this period of time. And the grayish line is our general wages. And the cumulative loss of purchasing power is this yellow line. And so when firefighters started answering surveys differently and talking to us differently about pay wages, and then we started looking at some of this financial information, it's no wonder that this has become a high priority for firefighters this year. And so let's look at the history of Austin firefighter wages. There's been this notion, and I think it needs to be refuted, that we are the highest paid in Texas. So this was from 17, this is where the city reaffirms the city of Austin commitment of keeping firefighters the highest paid in Texas.
When years and years ago, when I first started working in this process, and I think it was probably when Jesus was still the city manager here, the articulated position in the city of Austin at the bargaining table is that we wanted to be #1 in the state of Texas for pay and benefits for public safety personnel.
And then your city commits to most favored status for firefighters in 2017.
And what we're proposing to do, and we hope that this will be translated back to your members, is that this is a proposed reset cycle where we readjust that trend line, but we continue to keep your personnel at the most, what I call the most favored nations standpoint. What do you call it? Most favored nations. When you take contract law in law school, one of the things that you talk about is the most favored nations clause. And it's a provision that basically says, this is actually better than a typical most favored nations clause. A most favored nations clause means we get as good a deal as anybody else. This is actually, we get a 5% better deal than anybody else.
And so these were some of the premises from 2017, keeping firefighters above other cities. And then after we did research and indexing, we came back with this wording that the city accepted without debate or edit, that we should strive to increase firefighters' base wages significantly, to approximate increases in local cost of living, not just the cost of living, during that same time period for which the base wage increases were provided. So these were some overriding tenets. I think some of them were also, the city wanted to reset, and they're using this indexing to do that. But this is some very important outcomes, I think, from 17. And so this is where we're trying to redefine some of these narratives. Austin firefighters are clearly not the highest paid in Texas. So this is a comparison. Now this is just net wage, and net wage we're generally higher than a lot of departments. This does not include total compensation. This does not include adjusting for local CPI. And this black line is the median line for all the cities. This solid black line is Austin. As you can see, we're not the highest paid. Not even when you don't even factor in cost of living. So down here is where we need some real help for getting qualified recruits. But you can see we don't even get close to, we start passing some of these cities or getting even with them at year 17, year 20, year 21. But that's exposed that Austin is the highest. And again, this is just net pay compensation.
Could you explain what you mean by net pay versus gross paid or hourly paid or scheduled?
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that because our economist actually came up with the slides.
Okay.
So here's a flyer from Plano. In Plano, Texas, they start salaried firefighters at $74,000 plus. It would take one of our firefighters 9 years to reach that level. By the time they reach that level, they'd already be at a higher level because they top out their entire step raise at year 2. And it would take our Austin firefighters 21 years to exceed that. And so that's kind of a good discussion on step raises. Some people, mostly I think management would say, well, you get these step raises all the time. And they keep adding up regardless of cost. And I would say that it puts off the wage that maybe firefighters should be earning sooner. And the city of Plano certainly acknowledges this with their pay scale.
Are you going to send this to us because I can't quite see all those?
Yes, I'm going to I can send you the PowerPoint and the video.
Perfect.
Both, yes. Make sure we didn't doctor that video, huh?
You don't have to send the video.
Trust me,
Yeah.
terrified.
So as it turns out, we're not even the highest paid in Travis County. This is CBAR's pay scale in red, and we'll send this to you so you can see it better. They have the Austin pay scale in red, so they can demonstrate to their firefighters that at every rank and at every level, they're making more than Austin firefighters are. This is Lake Travis' new pay scale. They exceed our firefighters, our specialists, our lieutenants, our captains, our battalion chiefs at every level. I don't know if you have any examples of that.
Yeah, we put this up here and realized you really can't see it.
Yeah.
On the screen right now. So, well, I think we want
The one before C-bar?
C-bar.
C-bar, yes.
Yes.
Who is that?
It's an ESD in Travis County.
It's an ESD, okay.
Yeah.
And this is,
This is Lake Travis.
and that's also an ESD? Okay.
Yeah, what you see here is through most of the career, we kind of jump back and forth. They pay a little more, we pay a little more. It's mainly because we do step raises every 3 years, so we'll hit a big jump, and then they'll be behind, but they do a step raise every single year, so we kind of have a smooth trend. And so throughout the careers, we kind of jump back and forth, they pay a little more, we pay a little more. But then when we talk about 21 years, they're making $1,385 more per year, and they continue climbing to the point where they're making $12,553 more a year. In our top down firefighters. You see the same thing at most of the ranks. Top down BCs, they're making $15,878 more a year. And ours are, you'll see all that when we send it to you. But throughout most of the career, we're barely even, and then they start just pulling the tent down.
And also just want to mention, we're not saying that we feel like we're terribly compensated. We're just trying to kind of debunk the myth that we're the highest paid in Texas. It's just simply not true. So here's the end of the pay scale, and once I get the full thing, I'll let you know. This is someone sent me this from Hutto. It shows the first row is firefighter, and of course second one's driver, and then they don't have a lieutenant and captain, and then battalion chief. They're higher than every one of our pay scales at the end during these years, every single one. So that's a little ESD in Livingston County. And what's happened over the years, I think most people know this, that all the fire departments is, the bigger city fire departments did make more money than all the other fire departments for many, many years. And those fire departments lost talent. They lost, just like classics with supply and demand, right? They lost talent to the bigger cities. And as they grew, they started enhancing their pay scales so they'd be more similar to the bigger cities. And so now we're in this environment where maybe 10 years ago, some of these notions might have been true that Austin's paid a little bit more. It's just simply not true anymore.
So are any of the examples you gave us cities versus ESDs?
They're fire departments, yes. They're ESD fire departments.
ESD fire departments,
Yes.
and versus
Well, these were just trying to scout.
versus the comparisons that we had used on the 5 percentages in 2017 is my question, I guess.
Yeah, well, the first chart, and you asked what net compensation is, I'll get that answer for you, but the first chart was all the comparable cities that we looked at.
Okay, and then these are ESDs,
Yeah, these are local economy ESDs.
but ESD taxes.
Yes.
Okay.
So after we researched indexing last time, we realized that there were some things that should have been considered, and comparables are very common. For instance, making adjustments for cost of living, looking at total compensation, justifying the comparables, stuff like that. And so we did our own, and then we kind of came back with a different mix. And so I think at that point, the city and the association decided to go a different route. So this was us trying to go that different route. And so we laid out this language that we thought was extremely important. And if you look at the videos, I talk about it over and over and over. I talk about the firefighters trying to maintain a cost of living raise. You're not losing purchasing power. I probably said it 15 times throughout the remainder of the negotiations. So we looked at this as a very important premise or philosophy. And when we laid it out, it was accepted without edits. So you can't, so this is actually the tape where I kind of lay it out. Just one example of that. So we're trying to develop this philosophy, and again, I think it's a more gentlemanly way to do things, or however you want to say it, where we could just agree that firefighters will be looking at a cost of living raise if you have kind of a maintenance level contract. Now, that's kind of a term of art, I realize that. Maybe we make that more precise, but that's our vision, okay? And we could agree on an index and to use, and right now it's hard to find one, but I think we could figure that out if we wanted to. And then we can go into bargaining, and if you have a 3-year contract, you look back at the previous 3 years, you kind of know what your wage is going to be. And so that's off the table. Now we're talking about higher level issues when it comes to bargaining. And so I said in there that, it's hard to know what index to use. Well, we've learned a lot since then. And I think the city charter informs us what index to use too. It should be CPIW, adjusted for housing, taxes, and other pertinent economic factors. And so in 2017, this was the most fiscally conservative contract ever negotiated in Austin among public safety entities. And you know, I think Selena has done a really good job of some of the social media she did. You guys may not appreciate quite as much, but I think the 14, we're worth more than 14 cents is genius, you know, really good stuff. Well, in 2017, a 0.5% raise to our lowest echelon is a 5-cent raise. Year 2, a 10-cent raise. And it's not hard to see how we got so far behind in purchasing power over this period of time, given this sort of numbers. 6.25% over 5 years, and the last couple of years, the highest CPI raises we've had in one of the hottest economies in the nation. And so again, you know, same chart, it's a loss of purchasing power. And that's something we feel very important that we should maintain from a base year of 2016. We talked about it over and over in 17, and I think, you know, your side of the table, Devin, I know you weren't there then, but I think that they were working in earnest. They were trying to do a couple of things that were hard to do, and I think they thought they had a good plan, and I think they were honest about their plan. You know, they really thought we were the highest paid. They really wanted to keep it 5%. You know, all those sort of things, and we wanted to maintain purchasing power. And in the end, we agreed to a 6.25%. But it wasn't much of an interest-based negotiation at that point. If you look at the last tape, Lowell is driving us to basically saying, I mean, he didn't quite say this strongly, but he was saying, implying, impasse, you take the deal. And so we had to decide, you know, do we walk away from the deal or do we take the deal? And we started, you know, some of the folks, well, you know, cost levy's been pretty flat. Maybe it'll be all right, you know, we're kind of justifying it, right? As it turns out, I think we can both admit now we got it wrong. You know, that it wasn't even close to a cost of living raise. It wasn't close to a rate that would maintain purchasing power for firefighters. And the impact of that is firefighters have been shouldering that burden. That's why I'm hearing from firefighters differently than I ever had before for my 12 years as being a union president. You're right, usually come to the operational issues. We're coming to you now with pay being the #1 priority by far. And so the conceptual proposal is to regain lost purchasing power over the last 5-year contract, and come up with a way in the future to make sure we don't lose purchasing power going forward. And we have some thoughts on that we hope to present, not today, but soon. And we'd like to see the PMF report before we start doing some of that. We think it's important, and I think there should be a shared interest that we compress the first 6 years. I'm not talking about compressing every part of the pay scale. I'm just talking about moving. So this top row is current, and this other row is what we call the compressed. So you would take the 69,000 and put it at base pay, and so that's what they would receive for base 1 and 2, and then you take the 6-year and put it at step 3. And they would basically not then change step raises until they get to 9, then it'd be the same step raise schedule after that. What this would do is it would satisfy some of the younger firefighters from our members that really struggle for the first 6 years. And it would also make us more competitive in the marketplace. And I think we're going to really see this next hiring process more than we've ever seen it before. It's going to be harder to recruit the type of candidates we're used to getting. And I think this would help this.
So after year 9, so years 10 through 25 on the current step increase, you're saying that would not change?
That would stay the same.
They would continue to get all of the steps that they currently get?
Yes, and there might be a couple ways to get here, but we're not talking about compressing the whole step system down. So year 9 is kind of like the wall, right? Nothing changes beyond that. We're just trying to change the composition before that.
Okay, and so the differential between years 9 and 10 would not change either?
Nope.
So that would be increased based on that?
Nothing after year 9, including year 9, beyond that changes at all in terms of.
Okay, so you're not asking for it to carry out?
Pardon me?
So you're not asking for it to carry out?
We're not. No, and there might be you guys might have better ways to get there than this, and I would like to hear them. We're just trying, I mean, you understand the concept, right? We're just trying to make sure that people, when they're starting their career, can look at Austin as a choice because they're making the money they need to make that decision to come to this job.
Right, and obviously you're gonna give us a proposal, I'm just throwing two different things. If the differential doesn't change, then this does carry out throughout it, and you just said both of those things. So the differential would either be reduced after year 9, between years 9 and 10, or this entire would be carried out, but the steps would not change.
The steps, including year 9, don't change at all.
But the differential between 9 and 10 would change.
No,
It wouldn't be reduced.
it'd be the same it is now.
Okay, so the whole scheme would then carry out.
Yeah,
Okay.
everything after, including year 9, stays the same. All we're talking about really is taking year 3 step and moving it to base 0. And continuing on that all the way through 1 and 2. And then taking step 6 and moving to year 3, continue it all the way up to year 9. And then you're back on the regular schedule again for step raises.
But you would incrementally increase it from 9 to keep the same differentials, right?
No,
Sarah, let's just wait to get there.
no.
I think I understand what this
You
is.
can screenshot the current pay scale, slap it on the end of this, and with the exact same on both of these things.
Okay.
Yeah, the only change we're making is year 8 and below. Actually, only year 6 and below, because year 7 and 8 would actually be the same too.
Yeah.
And then assignment pay, AFD assignment pay has not increased in 18 years. Increase in assignment pay, we'd like to do that by $300 a month. We also have a seniority kind of schedule that, as an appendix, we were adding that would continue to maintain purchasing power. You can kind of see what the theme of this is purchasing power. Same things we talked about 17, we're talking about in 22. How do we regain and maintain purchasing power? Not make gigantic gains, but maintain and regain purchasing power. And we're adding dispatch, arson, wildfire to the assignment pay. And this asterisk here is a declaration of existing right. We believe that should have been negotiated, wildfire division. And so we're not saying we're bringing it to the table the first time. We'll make it very clear that we think that's a declaration of an existing right we have, and we're trying to correct it at the table. And then this is the grievance for staff pay, filed by an assistant chief. They looked at the contract and the board agrees that it's a 40-hour position. I am not on the grievance, but I'm including this on our proposal, on our conceptual proposal. And the member is asked for 5 years of back pay for those positions. And we also consider this as a declaration of existing right. Longevity pay, we will propose something that adjusts for purchasing power. And then the pension contribution. So the top half of this chart shows the employee pension-related contributions, and the bottom part shows the City of Austin employer pension-related contributions. I want to talk about the history of this because some people at this table may know it and some people may not. But in 2008, 2009, we were infinite years underfunded in the fire system. We were the worst by far. Worse than police, worse than cities. In fact, when I became president, I had a former trustee come to me and say, Bob, you should never negotiate for pension because it's the city's liability. If it goes broke, they're on the hook. They gotta fix it. I told them that's absolutely not the way I'm gonna operate. I went to my members and we decided that we would fix our own problem. And so we came up with legislation, and as part of the contract 2009, to increase the city contribution to 22.05, which I believe about 2% of that was wage concession. And then we increased our contributions by 3%, bringing our contribution up to 17.08. Since then, the city and the police did not fix their systems. They've actually become a burden to the bond rating, and they're a huge liability on the sheet. So there's reforms going on. And if you look at the police, this aggregate contribution from the city is 33.6%. Now, I think the actual contribution is about 25, and how you get that aggregate is there's an infusion of cash in the police system of about $136 million over 20 years, present value, which turns into about $180 million over 20 years, future value. And when you aggregate that back to what the contribution rate is, it's actually 33.6%. Now, we're not going to ask for 33.6%, but we do think there should be some consideration for the good stewardship we did to our system, how we took that money off the city's balance sheet, and how we basically preserve the bond readiness to the extent we can by being good stewards, financial stewards of our system. And so when you start looking at spreads between the two in this column, the total column here, so City of Austin spread, and I don't think the employees have gone up 2% yet, okay? I think that's a recommendation. I think the city has raised their contribution for the City of Austin employees from 18 to 19, from the best I can tell from the documents I've seen. So if these are wrong, we can redo the chart, but you're looking at the spread, 15% that the employees are putting when you include FICA. And of course, we don't have FICA, which according to city documents is a very important part of the pension system for police and city employees. You look at the spread here, the city employees put in about 15% when you include FICA, if you're considering this 10%, which I don't believe they are yet. And then this employee, and then the city's putting in 25%, so you have the spread of about 10%. Okay. You look at police, and they're putting in, the employee contribution is about 22%. And then we have this 39% spread. So we have the spread between the difference between 39 and 22. It's pretty significant. And you look at ours, it's about a 5% spread. Okay, it's spread. We're putting in 17.8, and the city's putting in 22. We're about 5% spread. Half of what the city does, probably more than half, because I think there's still 8% contribution. And way lower than the police. We'd like to address that spread. And we believe we put the city in a position where they should be able to afford to do that. There should be some consideration for the fact that we did what we did. And, with us, and of course the other ends that didn't, as we put in this situation. We would like to see an increase in contributions and or a buy down of the firefighters' pension contribution. We don't have any more since this is conceptual, we don't have any more than that right now. But we think it certainly should be looked at. I mean, I know I got some of this information from the employee pension system, and this term equity reform or reform equity I got from the system, and they were really making the case that police got these different considerations, so we should too as an equity. And we feel the same way, except we feel even stronger, because we put ourselves to be one of the strongest pension systems in the state, from one that was infinite years underfunded without very much city intervention at all. And we think that that's worth something, and that should be recognized. And that sort of citizenship behavior should be rewarded. So that's our conceptual presentation on that. And this just talks about what I said. So we could do this a couple different ways: increasing employer pension contributions, or decreasing employee contributions, or some combination thereof. Right now, of course, it's a trustee decision, but there's some, I think the police have a corridor plan now for their contributions, which takes away some risk. I think the city of Austin's working on a similar to a corridor plan. And, we don't have that, and we don't need it right now, but it'd be good to build in a contingency plan within our pension system. So extra contributions could go to contingency plans if you have low years. You can weather those low years, and it's not just a benefit to the employees, the users of the system. It's a benefit to the city, because now you're not hurting the health of your pension system. You have another tool to fight that, and then it keeps that liability off the city system, because we've been talking about this a lot on so many members. It's our pension system in that we get the benefit. We put a lot into it, 18.7%. We get the benefit, but it's the city's liability. And so I'm hoping the city can see that it would be the fair thing to do, but also helps them in a way too, because it lowers their chance of a liability issue if we're able to build those sort of funds up. And that's basically that proposal.
All right, I appreciate it. I think, you know, a lot of things have happened since 17, yeah. You know, our CPI has gone up, but also the legislature passed a 3.5% cap, which is fundamentally different than the taxing entities of ESDs and what they can take in. So, you know, that does put us and other cities in Texas, you know, under much tighter restrictions than we had before the tax cap came in. So, you know, that's one thing. It is a little disheartening to see that y'all not agreeing to the same tax cap language that the other two agreed to. You want to negotiate over it, which I understand. It's just, you know, it's that's, you know, I just bring that up because yes, since 17 the tax cap has passed, but that fundamentally is driving a lot of the decisions economically of the city. And I saw on the pension stuff, just while I'm thinking about it, you know, you said the options, and I'm not faulting you, Bob, I think this is, you're doing your job for your membership. The options are decrease employee contributions or increase employer contributions. What you're leaving out is all in exchange for some of the things the city is doing for, at least the APRS. I know the Cobra side is still working on it, but even in 2012 when the Cobra side changed, you know, we had a new tier. Had lower benefits, had more members from the city onto the boards to ensure stewardship, but, you know, you're leaving all that stuff out. You know, that police has a new tier now. They were actually one of the last police retirement systems in Texas to succumb to a second tier, but now they're there. You know, the civilians already have a second tier, and we'll see what happens at the next legislature session. And so, you know, there's some other changes that happen in addition to just, hey, you know, because you and I have had this conversation before. You know, your members feel like, hey, the city bailed out police, and y'all did the right thing and took care of your system, and you're not getting the same benefit. But there were other things that the city got. I just want to make that known to your members as well. You know, that there were other things that are not listed in there. You know, namely being a second tier and more board seats for city appointees.
Yeah, and I leave it out. I'm very proud to talk about our pension system. We only leave it out because it's, you know, it's a conceptual wage proposal. We can talk about it all day long. We're happy to. And believe me, I talk about the pension a lot. It's our number one priority as an association. But in terms of tax caps, we're asking to not lose purchasing power. We're not asking for gigantic pay raises. We want to be able to buy the same goods in 17 now. And we can't. And so the city should be able to find funds to restore purchasing power. It's not a big ask.
Well, but you say it's not a big ask, but if the price of milk has gone up 8% in 1 year, and we're only allowed to, the vast majority of our funds come from property tax, we're only allowed to go up 3.5%. We've got 13,000 employees whose milk prices have gone up 8%, and we can only collect an extra 3.5%. So there's a gap of 4.5%.
Of course, you're leaving out some things too. You know, it's not just property tax; it's capped. I mean, it is only targeting property tax that's capped. It's not new construction. It's not sales tax. So it is a portion of the budget, not the entire budget.
Right.
So that's a very important distinction, right?
We would argue it's a large portion of the budget, but yeah.
It is significant, but it's not the only part of the budget. And in terms of tiers, you should be thanking us. You know, the fact that we don't have a second tier is what's going to help recruit good firefighters. I think police and employees will have a harder time doing that with a second tier. So fixing the system early was the right thing to do for a lot of regards, but actually it helps a shared interest. Part of having a good pension system is having a good recruiting system, and maintaining the one-tier system is a huge advantage to the city. So the wage proposal is pretty short. It's not a proposal for wages, it's a conceptual proposal also, but we may have some of these actual proposals ready for you later today. So the main principles is, you know, we want to reduce our work week to 48 hours and 53. And we don't think it can be done right away for several reasons. We would propose it's done, you know, December of 2023. We believe that we would need to do some sort of committee to get there, because there's lots of lot of logistical and processing concerns to reach that level. In October 22, we would like to see the overtime, productive time. We'd like to see the threshold hours basically for firefighter overtime move to 48 hours. And the hourly rate adjusted upward to reflect the same annual amount received at the 53 hours and 48. And this is very similar to what EMS did. I know EMS did this outside the contract, but very similar to what EMS did. Now, not quite the same, because I think their threshold for overtime always was 42. But they adjusted their salary up to meet the reduced work week that and they basically reduced from a 48 to a 42.
Yeah.
We're saying this.
They didn't do it outside the contract, they negotiated that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was in
what contract they negotiated?
It was in their contract, yeah. The only thing the city did was we were obligated to, at minimum, do it by, I think, the last year of the deal, and we moved it up a year.
Yeah. Oh, and that was the 12 hours they added in January.
No, we were obligated, I think the 13 contract said, 13 or? 18. 18 contract said we would go from 48 to 42 by the last year of the 18 contract, but we actually moved it up to be the third year of the contract.
I wasn't aware of that, so I stand correct. I didn't realize that there's something inside the contract.
Yeah.
But regardless, they moved from a 48 to a 42. And we would like to move to 53 to a 48. And, you know, I think I just already said this. It's a similar program with reproduction. We're not looking to go beyond 48. I think Houston is currently 48. And but we'd like to talk about how we can start getting there. We're having the same sort of issues in terms of workload. Not exactly. I think EMS is a different type of department, even though we work together on the scene. But we have other similar workload issues, and I think Chief Lyers can attest. The Wellness Center is full of people seeking mental health and mental health relief and talking about their issues, and there's a lot going on in the fire department. And you know, I think with a lot of the overtime right now and the vacancies, it makes it harder. But the truth is that, you know, the fire department's always been treated as, you know, you guys get to work all these hours, and that's the way it's going to be. And we want to kind of look at a different paradigm where we start getting some relief from that. I think again, it's going to be really important as time goes on and firefighters have different choices on where to go. I think this could be a really good recruiting tool to get people to consider coming to Austin, and it would give our current members some relief. So we'd like to talk about this more. We have some things written up that we could put on the table, or if you'd rather do this in the subcommittee or talk about it more conceptually between the two groups, that's fine too. Whatever you prefer. That's one of the goals our members communicated to us, and something we certainly wanted to offer to propose.
What's this do with, because I'm sure you've done this math, in your estimation, what does that do going from 53 to 48 as far as creation of new FTEs? How many does that put us at?
I wouldn't want to be held to this number, but I think it's a little over 100 FTEs.
100 new positions.
But, you know, about the same proportion of the EMS. Yeah. I think that's all I have right now. Matt, did you have anything to add to that? And if you thought of any other things for Matt to talk about in terms of finding arbitration?
No, I mean, not yet, but, you know, I will say this, no, without, you know, I know you guys are choosing, you know, when you want Matt to be at his office and just send stuff to him and which days you bring him here. I think we're going to proceed on as if he's here, and if, you know, you want to say, okay, well, we got to get our attorney to look at this, that's fine with us. We're not trying to, you know, rush our proposals, so, you know, and change our course on the days Matt's here, because I trust that you're going to email him and he'll be able to watch the videos anyway, so, you know, I think y'all are well represented and, you know, he can give y'all advice even if he's not here.
Yeah, we just brought him in to be helpful. We're not
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
rush your proposal.
No. And, yeah, I didn't see it that way. We do have some that we can just go through really quickly before we take our lunch break if you want.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is strange. It is, it thinks it's a second line.
All right, so Article 4, management rights. It's weird not seeing it on the computer. We consider this more cleanup. I don't think this actually changes anything substantive. So if you look at, you know, for example, train, promote, demote, the right to hire, I think that's already an inherent right in terms of what management rights have. The right to discipline, I think discipline encompasses suspend and discharge, so substantively, this isn't supposed to be substantive. If you see something that you have concerns with, or you think it changes something, we don't think you'll see we have our footnote here. It's mainly cleanup to memorialize existing practices. And just kind of for historical purposes, your original proposal had no changes, and we're making some cleanup changes that I think just explains it a little bit more. Establish, that includes eliminate or modify. So things like that, you'll see that it's kind of trickled throughout there. Section 2, again, I think this is mainly just, you'll see our footnote here. It memorializes existing practices. This just kind of legal wording that really doesn't change what's already in place. So unless you have any questions, I think you're probably going to want to look at it very closely. And Matt's here, so I'm glad that y'all can walk through this together.
So I have one question.
Sure.
And I'm sure Matt will have better questions after this review, but I remember there was a grievance in 2012 over the hiring process. And the attorney at the time, Michael Crone, brought management rights up and said, hey, it doesn't matter if you have this entire Article 17 on hiring. You know, management rights says we have the right to hire and do what we want. And I don't think the arbitrator saw it that way. I think the arbitrator thought that the language of 17 is much more specific than the references to hiring here. I mean, it's one of the grievance. But I would assume that's the same way you look at it, the more specific language, contract language, certainly override more general language.
Yeah, you have a specific Article 17 that I think, even though each party may have like their legal positions as to what they think about cadets, we'll get to that. You have those specific practices in place. And really our intent here is to not change anything substantive, just clarify, clean up, and memorialize what we already have in existence.
No, it looks like that at first glance. We'll take a look at it.
Sure. So I know we had already proposed some changes. We didn't, this line here that's not been changed from our initial proposal. We had some discussion regarding section 5. And so here's what we've come up with, and y'all can kind of chew on this. The association agrees to reimburse the city for the cost of making such deductions in an amount not to exceed 10 cents per deduction. That's not changed. The city will not charge this fee for 5 organizations which have been approved under section 2B above. 2B above was not changed as named by the association. So we've taken out the specific references to those organizations. You can choose whichever ones you want. We're limiting it to 5. And again, part of it is to be a little more consistent with the other associations, but we listened to what you said last time, and we don't want to say no to some and yes to others. I think that we kind of think that should be entirely up to y'all, what you think are the organizations.
I like that flexibility. I think the reason we had them on there was we could demonstrate they were kind of shared, charities that management may both work on and towards and all that sort of thing. I mean, I'm not gonna involve them saying we have more flexibility. That's the reason I think it was there.
There is an asterisk to the flexibility, so let's
Okay.
put it out.
Yeah, and so there's a couple footnotes here, right? So in one of y'all's proposals, it was the information request. So I think we talked about this last time. We're trying to have a process in place for information requests. So right now we have rejected the new 17, and this is the same language that we've included in there before, indemnification. However, again, the city would reconsider indemnification if the association would remove authority to make changes on employees' behalf for section 2A. So going up to 2A. The association may change the amount of deduction for those employees who have authorized payroll deductions by providing notification to the city at least 3 pay periods in advance of the change if authority has been given to the association by the employee either through written agreement or bylaws of the association. So the reason we have included the indemnification language in there is because mainly we're just like trusting y'all's representation that you have the authority to, that we have the authority, that we're trusting y'all's representation that you got the authority from your members for us to have the authority to take out money from their paycheck essentially. And so.
Or to change it.
Or to change it.
So essentially, if you want the right to change these organizations for the life of the contract, then indemnify us. If you're just gonna say, hey, it's just gonna be these, and that's it, we're not gonna change it, we'll take out the requirement for indemnification. Because our whole purpose is, we're believing you and trusting your decision that you have not only that right, but that your members are okay with it. And so, but if you don't wanna change it, then we don't have the need for
So is that all we're indemnifying you for, is just that aspect alone?
Yeah.
Okay, and did I ever send you our agreement? Or, excuse me, our deduction form?
Yes, you did.
Okay, and I think, maybe it's before you, Devin, I thought it was you. We negotiated that pretty heavily between contracts, what the wording should be on that. And I thought the wording that was on that satisfied a lot of what y'all are talking about now, but apparently.
Well, it's not that, it's just, look, you have a right to change that agreement with your members without our input. You have a right to change your bylaws without our input, right? Like you don't ask the city of Boston or me for my sign off on your bylaws or your
No, but
agreements.
we do, that form is, I've always looked at it as that to be agreed upon form.
Right, but I think this is pretty, a, pretty halfway, meet in the middle solution, which is, if you just have no need to change those, then we don't have a need to ask for indemnification. Our only issue is, when you want to change it in the middle of a contract, we have no problem doing it, just cover us if you got employees.
This isn't terrible, I just had a few questions about it. So like on the deduction form, you and I, we went back and forth a lot on that before it got approved. And where am I wrong? It seems like that satisfies everything. I'm trying to figure out where I'm wrong here. So it seems like it says right on there that you're signing this agreement and we can change the dues, the association can change the dues if necessary. It says all that on a form that an individual is signing that payroll then inputs from. That seems like pretty ironclad stuff to me.
Well, Bob, as you're well aware, I think the contract's ironclad doesn't stop grievances from happening because someone takes it differently, right? So someone could still say, well, I don't think that's what I intended when I when I
Okay.
signed that. I'm just saying, it's a very far-fetched thing. It just happened for EMS with CLEAT. And so we're just trying to make sure, if you
No,
want to make changes in the middle, then here's what we need in exchange. If you don't need to make changes in the middle, we're fine with that in the middle.
And that's fine, and that's all I was looking for. I mean, if you think it's materially ironclad, but you still have some concerns and you want us to indemnify those concerns, if that's what it is, I just want to make sure that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what it
But
is.
you don't see any big flaws in what we have necessarily in the form, it's just that you would like some more protection.
I'll put a big asterisk on that. I do have some recollection of talking about the form, and I think probably Sylvia was here at the time too, but it was years ago. I haven't seen that thing in
Yeah.
a while, so. But at some point, if we signed off on it, we were comfortable with it, but we also didn't have what happened just recently with
Yeah.
EMS and CLEAT, so it's kind of, yeah.
Well, whether we accept this or not, I'd like to work with you on that form and see what other ideas you have that could make it better. And even if we were to indemnify, we certainly want to make that form as good as possible, so your perspective would be appreciated.
Yeah, okay.
So the next one is Article 23. And so I'm gonna go back and forth here, but, so y'all's original proposal, had redlined, the way I originally read this, is kind of this, the parties agree to disagree, right? The original language, by including this article, the city does not concede the association is the exclusive bargaining agent for the fire cadets, and the association does not concede that it is not the exclusive bargaining agent. So there's like agree to disagree language, right? And then y'all's initial proposal was to strike out that agree to disagree language, and the association is the exclusive bargaining agent for fire cadets under 174. And so our proposal is sort of the counter of that, which is the city does not concede that the association is the exclusive bargaining agent for the fire cadets. And then we even cited all the laws, all the kind of the rationale and the trail of how we got there. You know, they do not meet the definition of a firefighter under 174.003 due to their non-permanent status while cadets, nor do they meet the definition of firefighter in 143.003 as they have not yet met the requirements for certification by TCFP under Chapter 419. Notwithstanding the above, for the purposes of efficiency and the orderly conduct of business, the city has agreed to modify certain portions of the Texas Local Government Code as it relates to cadets. So kind of touching on sort of the conversation we were just having with Article 17, we're sort of retaining our rights, but we are also understanding that we are bargaining over it as well. So we've kind of included the counter to your counter in terms of our legal position, and so we do accept the AFA proposed change in 2B, which is, sort of seems like a clarification, you know, type thing. But anyway, so that's kind of how we got there, the rationale and the road we took to get there in terms of our legal position.
Yeah, I don't think Section 1 changes anything. I think it just kind of does more explaining as to, at least on the city side, why we don't think, before we just said, we don't think they are, you guys think they are, okay, let's go on with the rest of the article. This one just says, we don't think they are because of X, Y, and Z. If you want to add what you think they are because of A, B, and C, that's fine, and then we can go on to Section 2, the rest of it. So we just think we should, for the record, because, yeah, you're right, Bob. Well, some of us are going to be gone before the next contract comes around, you know, and then 2 contracts, 3 contracts later, you know, they're not going to realize what any of these arguments were. So.
Right.
Well, we think so much of you, Dick. We hope you never retire and stay here forever. I think biology will catch all of us.
I think that means it shows me how much you want to punish me. You know, it's like, hey,
It could be looked at that way. And I'm not sure I intended that.
Yeah. So like Devin just said, I mean, we had other the prior language, you know, why the city believes that it is not the association is not the exclusive bargaining agent. We just expanded on that.
Yeah, this is more your realm. Do you have any questions now, or do you want to?
I don't think so. I mean, we can talk about it. I don't know how productive it is for us to do like a legal pissing match in the article. But I guess the position is, you all don't think they're part of the bargaining unit, but you wanna negotiate some of the wages and working conditions for them.
No, I think we're just, our proposal really isn't changing the previous concept of the language that was already in there. We're just now taking a look at it due to the changes that were proposed from the AFA side, which actually kind of takes away the agree to disagree language, and we're saying we'll keep in this agree to disagree language, but we're just gonna explain a little more why we disagree. Does that make sense?
But yeah, Matt, I think at the end of the day, I think your question is, well, then why is the rest of the article there if you guys are agreeing to disagree?
Right.
And the answer is to try to get a deal, which is why I showed up the first time. I think it's one of those things where Bob didn't want us to say, or AFA, well, I don't know when this came up, but didn't want us to say that we didn't think they were, and we didn't want him to say they thought they were, but, you know, both sides have to.
It's been there a long time.
Long time.
I think it might be there from 2005. I could be mistaken.
Yeah. So, but I think that's the history, is just, if you guys disagreed, then why'd you do it? So, it wasn't gonna be the thing that stopped us from getting a deal, but we wanted to make sure the record was clear as to what our position was.
Right. The last one we have is maintenance of standards here. And we included some language basically in terms of past practices, standard from Okuri and Okuri. I think this benefits both sides. We feel this definitely benefits both sides in terms of when we do have contract grievances and the arbitrator knows to use this standard. I think, Matt, you would agree with me that most arbitrators would use this standard when they're deciding issues, but there could be the random arbitrator that does his own thing. And so we believe that just using this language, which is standard, just completely standard, actually benefits both sides. So as to what a past practice is, so nothing too crazy, but I know you guys will want to look at it and we'll double check where we've cited things and trust but verify.
Exactly.
All right, that is it for us. In my opinion, we've got a lot of stuff to work with. I think you guys look at this, not just some articles, but also some of the financial concepts that we can work on. What were your thoughts? I mean, I know we meet again, Monday.
We might be able to meet later today.
Okay.
Some of the conceptual stuff from the work week reduction, we have made some progress on those articles. And of course, they contain more than just, that. So, I mean, their leave and overtime and hours of work. And it's possible, if the team can come to agreement on some of those things, we could present those later today.
And then we're gonna send you over Article 3 to TA.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
What about 11? You still not on?
I need to probably refresh my memory on 11.
I think that was shared communication.
We revised it.
Oh,
We'll take a look at it.
I thought we were really close.
I
on
think
that.
we are really close on it from my recollection as well, but we'll take a look at it.
Okay,
It could be something we address in the afternoon as well.
sounds good.
Well, where we at with your salary comp study?
I think we're making a decision today. We have a study done, but it doesn't have some of the stuff that we would, honestly, it's based on new information. We've never included healthcare costs as part of our comp study. But since y'all put up, the healthcare trust, we went back to them to see what it would take to include the healthcare costs, because that, obviously, we, the city, don't feel we get enough credit for the cost that the city puts into healthcare already. But I frankly don't think it's gonna get done in enough time for us to justify delaying giving you the study. So we're gonna talk about it, but you'll probably get it today is my guess. And just know if we amend it in the future to have the healthcare stuff, it's not because we tried to hide it from you, it's because we had to change it after we saw your proposal, because we feel like those numbers would be good. But we at least have the salary surveys, so.
And just estimate, I think we'll be ready to meet back between 2 to 3. That's a wide range, but thinking what we have in front of us, I think we could probably make that happen. Do you guys have a thought about what you might do in the afternoon?
I mean, I think we've given you our proposals for the day. So
Okay.
I think if you're ready at 2, let's meet at 2.
All right, well, I'll keep you updated.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Hey, Christine,
Yes.
did all that work out okay?
Yes, and I went back through that email trail and I saw where Chief Smith had responded to Chief George.
essentially be working a average 53 hours a week with the same Kelly schedule until the full conversion to the 48-hour work week. And what we're suggesting is that could be done by December 31st, 2023. And then some of this is wording section 2 almost directly out of the proposal, talking about the deadlines for converting from 53 to 48, forming a labor management committee to work through that over the next year and a quarter. But beginning October 22, what we're recommending is overtime will be figured on 48-hour threshold hours, and the firefighter salary will be adjusted upward to reflect the same annual salary, which I think that's close to what EMS did. I did not know they had that in the contract. In fact, several of us have looked at the contract, haven't seen it, so we're gonna look again. We're not gonna be lazy about it, but we may have to ask you guys for references.
Point it out.
And then, as I visit the dispatch section, they were pretty adamant about something to capture their work week. I think it's been the work week dispatch since around 1970, mid-70s. But there's been several times when different supervisors come in new and fresh and talk to them about changing it. They feel like sometimes threatening them. If they don't do certain things, they're gonna change it. And so as I go through, it's just people's opinions, right? As I go through and talk to dispatch, that was one of the things they really were very interested in making sure that it was clear. And we're trying to write it pretty broad, current, past, best practices, but essentially it's a modified 2472. And it has changed a little bit over the years, but it's kind of stayed as a modified 2472. That's why
So you're saying this reflects current?
It reflects current practice. I think it gives enough flexibility where changes like we've seen over the last several decades could still occur, as long as they're within the context of a modified 2472. So that's it. And there might be some places we missed, replacing 53 hours with Operation Firefighter. I mean, that's just gonna be some cleanup. We don't wanna hold off proposals just for that. We just wanna let y'all know, and someone on my team suggested that we take care of that, a lot of that definitions, and it would probably make sense to do that. The leave article, and the reason we had these 3 articles held back is they all somewhat had something to do at one point or another, maybe not anymore, but with the change in work weeks. This is just label changes here. The sick leave, you'd also want to add the word mental health or physical incapacity. And these hours here for sick leave separation reflect the equivalent of what the police do. And they had some provisions in there to incent people not to use sick leave. And we look forward to those discussions. We figured that'd be more of something management would want to maybe propose. And we'd expect you to propose. We didn't just take the police article and put it in there, because there might be some unique things that the fire would like to accomplish with that. And I'm thinking this is something you all can provide. I probably should have put it in as a public information request or request to you all. But we've been referencing this October 1st, 2014 memo for quite some time on accrual rates, and we'd like to do the work to put the accrual rates in the contract. And this is something we think would be helpful, actually, to incent proper usage. So right now, firefighters, there's only so many slots for vacation, and so there are some events that happen sometimes in their lives that are extremely important to them, and it's very difficult for them to get off. And so we're recommending a number, and the number we picked in our polls was 3, where firefighters can use to elect 3 times a year outside the AFP vacation slot system. I know San Antonio has something like this. It seems to be successful for them. And we're happy to talk about the numbers and conditions. One condition we knew that the manager wanted to include is certainly couldn't do this during holidays. You know, there might be some other stipulations that would make this more reasonable. But I think people would be less apt to use vacation inappropriately if they had options in which to replace their vacation. Not that everybody does, but I don't think we're naive. Some people do at times. So we'd like to try to incent better behavior. In the sick leave buyback program, we really would like to have a lot of conversation with you, so we're not, we're not married to anything here, but what we would like to do is make it less optional and more actually a program. And that's what we were trying to do here, and we upped the amount some too. And again, I think with this and the 3 slots you kind of use a year at your discretion for vacation, all these things would help to incent people to follow the policies and use all the different leaves in a more appropriate fashion. And the increased buyout too for sick leave should do that also, especially if there's some stipulation like on the police. I think they had, I just read through it really quick, but it sounds like they have some incentives, like if you only take so amount in the last 2 or 3 years of your career, then you go to this other level. And I think all that stuff's really good discussions to have. It could be beneficial to both sides. And we increase these caps to basically what the 6-month accrual rate is for vacations. Again, we are absolutely open to full discussion in this article. It's kind of a starting point. And we just didn't know on this unavailable emergency leave, we just don't know why if somebody has a bona fide family death that we need to limit it to 4. I mean, it's bad enough there are 5 deaths in a year, but I'm not so sure why we would say they can't go to the 5th one. So, and it seems like an outlier, and it is, but if these are bona fide events, then people should be able to take the time off. And I don't think it's going to cost a lot, because I don't think it'll happen very often at all. I doubt we meant the 4 limit very much, but I know somebody right now that's approaching that limit, just because they've had a terrible year with COVID and elderly parents and stuff like that. We just think that would be a nice give to have. And this was something we asked the assistant city manager about when we had our air shop guy whose son's going through cancer. And I made this pitch then, and I guess didn't make it good enough. It's quite on me. But again, if you want to be candid, not naive, there's these natural differences, sometimes attitudes develop that they're wrong and shouldn't. And I think I fought that most of my career when I've been in different staff jobs between sworn and non-sworn personnel in the fire department. And I think this would go a long way. And there were a lot of people that wanted to step up and give Johnny's son, some catastrophic leave. And I think go a long way to help that sort of morale issue, if there is one. I believe there is one to some extent. And it would actually save the city money. Because you're taking firefighters that presumably get a little bit higher rate, and giving their leave to a civilian for this sort of event. Again, the chief can still, the catastrophic leave is still under largely the purview of the fire chief. We just think it'd be a nice thing to do. And the truth is, when we see our civilians struggling, we want to help them. And this would be a great way we could do it very formally, I think. We do it through our relief and outreach fund, but this would be another great way to do that. we'd like to add Juneteenth. And we have a provision down here that any additional leave granted to regular employee holidays or special service leave will be also granted firefighters. You know, I know that's been a tough one in the past, kind of a Me Too type clause, but we'd like to at least put it on the table and discuss it. And we adjusted the exception vacation here based on Juneteenth. If that makes sense. We thought we did, at least we tried. That's that article. And then the last one is overtime. And so again, after this one, I think all the articles we hope to bring back to you today, they've all been brought except for the true wage proposal, which we hope to bring next week. Okay, save the best for last. This is something we want to discuss. So police, fire, and EMS are all different in some ways. Like for instance, the police, you can't compel a police officer to do overtime unless it's like a bona fide emergency. You just can't do it for regular operational needs. I think 142 states that pretty clearly. And so to incent police to show up for work and cover vacancies, they're giving them double time. 100% productive, double time. EMS, what they do, my understanding of EMS, and I hope I say it right, is they do it a little different than we do. We have voluntary overtime, and then we have mandatory. Well, they have mandatory to begin with. I would suspect it's something to do with their work week reproduction, because when you reduce a work week, you still have the exact same number of people day one, right? So you have to do something. So I think what they've done is, if I'm wrong, is they have mandatory days that they do before they ask for voluntary. So they started doing double time for their mandatory days and ended up doing, my understanding, best of my knowledge, double time for voluntary days also. And what they were happening in EMS, they were browning out units. So they would do their mandatory, and then the voluntary was truly voluntary. They wouldn't compel it. And so they'd brown out units if they can't get enough people to come in and lower service to the citizens in a sense. And the double time was to incent them to do that, just to come in, to make sure we don't brown units. The firefighters, our vacancy rates aren't quite as high, but we do have mandatory, and we do have voluntary time. And what we'd like to do is, again, all of them are a little different. So what I'm trying to accomplish here is to incent firefighters to be voluntary, so that people who really don't want to be on work that day don't have to be that day. We cut down on mandatory, compulsory overtime. If you think of it from a financial standpoint, it's not without cost, right? But you think about it from a mental health standpoint, trying to force somebody to come to work, and they're coming. If you order them to come to work, they go. But the reason they didn't sign up for voluntary is they didn't want to be there. You're literally making somebody that 100% of the time does not want to be there when you mandatory them. So we think there should be some consideration for that, especially considering how police and EMS ended up incentivizing their employees in a very similar fashion. So that's kind of it. And if I got any of that wrong, it was unintentional. To the best of my knowledge, that's how different departments operate. And then on-call, we have a policy for on-call, but in the opinions of certain people, certain sections, they don't believe that they're included in on-call, but they're actually on-call in some regards. In other words, they could be called anytime they have to come in, and so we would like to discuss that. We think that the rate should be higher than it is currently. So like the prevention says on-call, and it's in the policy, they do it, right? I mean, they do it 100% as far as I know. It's exactly what the policy says. But there's other sections might feel like they are truly on call too, because they're not in the policy, they're not awarding any on-call money, even though if they're called up, they gotta come in. And I don't know anymore, because it sounds like Arson might have changed their schedule, but I know Arson felt that way on one time. Whether they feel like that now, I'm not sure, but I know at one time they did. So I think.
So currently all of that is in the separate policy, the dollar amount and who qualifies is all in a separate standalone policy?
Yeah, my understanding, again, that's to my knowledge, the policy talks about on-call, and it talks about sections that get it, such as prevention, but doesn't mention other sections that those employees feel like they should be qualified for that also. And I didn't talk about this like I should have, so I'm sorry. 2.5 times the regular rate for all hours worked over 48 hours. This is the ask, is that with the work week reduction beginning in October, we would go to a 48 in terms of threshold hours, and then adjust the annual salary upwards to be equivalent at 48 as it was at 53. And I didn't say that earlier, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't trying to sneak past you there. That's what that is. And it's possible that if we both get very serious about a work week reduction article, that we do it as a separate article, because putting in these different sections is not maybe the best way to do it. It's certainly a way to do it. So we started thinking about that before we walked out here today. But we didn't want to delay you guys, y'all getting this stuff, so you could be, continue to work on it and think about it. So that's that. I brought to you a correction on my slide earlier, and unfortunately didn't download to this computer like I thought it would, but I could talk about it right now, we can show about it later. On the last slide of our conceptual proposal for wages, we had comparable tables for employee and employer contributions for all three pensions within the city of Austin. And I understated our contribution for employee, excuse me, I think I said it right, but I had it wrong on the chart. I had it as a 17.8, it's 18.7. And then the city, what I did was, at one time I forgot to back out Medicare, so I had it elevated by 0.45. I didn't change my total column. I changed the FICA column, not the total column. The spread I was talking about is about the same. It's around the 12 to 10% spread between the employer contributions for the city versus the fire. The spread is almost the same, but I wanted to make sure I cleared that up. And the PowerPoint I sent you had that correction made.
Right, thank you for clarifying.
And I do have one other item to discuss if it's okay. I talked to Chief Byers about this a little bit a day or two ago. So, wow, what did you talk about? I want to talk about a regular rate for Fair Labor Standards Act. I see Michelle's getting out of the pen there. But regular rate and longevity. And so I'm unconvinced that longevity is being paid correctly, and I'm unconvinced it's not either. I just don't know. And the reason I don't know is my understanding, because we negotiated this back in 2008, 2009, my understanding was that we moved from longevity being accredited to firefighters every week to being done in a lump sum. My understanding was that meant that the pay period or the work period in which you receive your longevity, that's when your half-time rate or your overtime factor should be affected and increased, because it's part of total compensation. When you're figuring your half-time rate. That doesn't seem to be happening on the paychecks. Now, it could be, and I bet it is, it could be that you guys doing a pro rata over the entire year and paying fractions of that to the overtime rate every single pay period. That's very, very likely what the answer is. I was just wondering if we could figure out what that answer is.
We can look at that. I have no idea what the answer is, but we can certainly look at that, and if it's needs a long explanation or a short explanation, we can kind of come up with a different way to approach that. If it's simple, it's simple. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And we'll figure out it.
I suspect it's being done right. I just like to know how it is being done, I guess.
I found out after Paulson it's being done right. Yeah.
And it maybe even, if it's not too hard, maybe, kind of a connected discussion on all the different factors that go into total compensation for that halftime rate would be good. I don't think it's a whole bunch, but I know longevity for sure is supposed to be included. And I bet it is, we just like to know how.
We can take a look at that for you.
I appreciate that.
So as stated, we don't have anything else for you today. I would want to clarify for the record that we are not gonna be meeting on Monday for anybody in the public who's watching who thinks we might be. We have moved that date to Tuesday. We appreciate your cooperation on changing that date. So 10 a.m. Tuesday, the 7th. That's not the
So
date, is
that
it?
would mean we'd leave our equipment here again until
Well, that's
Tuesday,
right.
correct?
The 7th, okay. Do we have any bookings in the meantime, Bernard? Or do we have any bookings in here in the meantime? They can leave their equipment till Tuesday?
It'd just be Monday, I think, at the end of the day.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been very, very convenient. Appreciate it. All right, thank you all for another great session. See you guys Tuesday.
All right.
And Bob, you're gonna send us those articles right now,
Okay,
14, 12, and 15?
we'll send you those articles, yes. And yeah, you've already sent the other ones to them.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And additionally, we will get you the compensation study either today or prior to Monday, so that you'll have a chance to look at it.
Okay, that sounds great. I sure appreciate it. Thank you.